All right, shalom, shalom, family. Once again, I'm bringing you an interview with an elder who's been around for over 50 years, walking in this way of life. Been through many journeys in his life. Um, he goes by the name of Rosh Zebekiah. I don't know what tribe you're from,
Mr. Zebekiah from Levi, really.
um, Ben Lewy, who's here to speak to us about his journeys, his time that he spent in Ben Azaking and all the different other places that he's been to, and I'm even in this time in these hardiest times with the pandemic with this COVID-19. Um, the elders willing to come on with me on Uzi Lewy channel to be able to share his story and the history of parts of the nation of Israel. So how are you doing, how are you doing, Elder?
Okay, I'm doing well.
Hallelujah. Um, so I like to start out with everyone from their beginnings, because we eventually get to the part that most of Israelites want to hear, which is the history um, from which you saw from your own eyes. But I like to give people a beginning. I like to show people where a person started from. So if you don't mind, what year were you born? Um, and
I was,
just speak to us about your parents and your childhood and all those things.
okay, I was born in Manhattan, in the X-ray hospital, uh, in 1943.
1943, right at the beginning of World War II.
I was born to Joseph Herman Spooner and Sylvia Mayfield Johnson, who became Mrs. Spooner.
Hmm.
And my father, at the time of my birth, he was in the service. He was drafted into the service, and he become a part of the Tuskegee Airmen. Started stationed in Alabama, and then going on to Africa and Italy. Is we'll get into him in which I will cover in a few minutes. But the idea was that most of the children coming up in that area, what they call the baby boom era, uh, had really been challenged because of the treatment of those soldiers who were returning from the war after they put their lives on the line.
Hmm.
They stood out and began to have to come back to the States, and then they weren't able to find jobs. Those who found jobs, like working at the post office, such as my father and my two uncles, they were oppressed in the post office. They were undermined, and certain things they just couldn't take. So a lot of them went to the street, you know, and trying to build and provide for their families the best way they knew how, or best way it was affordable to them.
Mm. Right.
Okay, so but in my father's case, that was one of the steps that he did. And when you understand his story, he came up with people, in the basketball era. Uh, he talks about him to give you a little coverage of who he was and what he was. Yesterday we pulled him up uh, at give me a minute.
You take your time.
Give you some of his history before I go on with me. He was born in 1919
Mm.
to Joseph, Conrad, and Georgiana Spoon. He fought this last battle with for forevermore to live in the hearts of many people. As life began to afford him, I take it back to the time that he was in the service. The original member of the 99th Fighter Squadron, stationed in Tuskegee, Alabama. This Black American hero was commissioned on duty with Tuskegee Airmen in 1943. That's the year I was born. So I didn't get to know him in that sense, as being read. At the time, he was drafted as a freshman from New York City College. Having played with the likes of Negro Basketball League, legendary John Isaacs and Pop Gates of the basketball era. In that point, he gained a scholarship, and then he was drafted into the service. As a loaded fighter, planes quickly and gun or he loaded the planes with ammunition. Spooner Squadron was sent to Casablanca in Morocco, where this racially segregated group established themselves as one of the most skilled squadrons in the Fighter Group 33, an all-white group that gained notoriety for running the Germans out of North Africa in the middle stages of World War II. Battles such as these established officers recommended that two or more Black squadrons be dispatched to Foggia Air Force Base in Ramatelli, Italy, to join the 99th Squadron. In 1945, Joseph Spooner was promoted to sergeant, and at the 333 or 332 fighter group was formed, the first Black fighting group in American Air Force history. Spooner was a respected member of the Bradhurst Park community in which he lived in Harlem, a chapter of the esteemed Tuskegee Airmen. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor from President Bill Clinton while Clinton was president. So that's just a beginning of the extent of my family.
Right.
That all my uncles on both sides all had joined the service.
Right.
All of them went to war and they came back, and they all began working at the post office, United States Post Office,
right.
in New York City.
Right.
But as I said, the treatment that they were receiving was belittling. So many of them just, took to the streets. A lot of them just got fired and had to struggle finding jobs.
Right, because I could imagine that being coming back from war, serving this place. I mean, they weren't getting parades down the Canyon of Heroes, and they weren't being welcomed with open arms from this government, except from their own families, being happy that they came back home. And I mean, Tuskegee Airmen, that's like Black royalty here in the United States, supposed to be at least, but when they came back, they came back to hardship and to struggle, just like everyone, just like, I mean, they white counterparts didn't have to face that, but they had to face it.
Exactly. So that created a problem, and it created the street scene of New York,
right,
Harlem, and the Bronx.
Right.
And as a result of that, because my father wasn't around when he came back home, and my mother really didn't get back together, okay, so I ended up being reared in the streets. I learned manhood, and everything that I learned from the streets.
Right.
And as a result, I was, how you say, coerced into many of the institutions in New York City penal system.
Penal system. Okay.
Okay, I went in 1961. I went to Woodburn, well, first to Elmira, then Woodburn Correction. In 1964, I ended up I had come home, got back in trouble again, and went away again. Okay. And at that time, I ended up in Sing Sing. And this is where my journey begins with acknowledgement of Israel
Right.
and understanding some of the Hebrew Israelite culture. When I arrived in Sing Sing, I met a brother by the name of Daniel Bird, who was known to most as Chief Counselor Daniel.
Mm.
We formed a class in Sing Sing, and we studied the history. His favorite saying was, read the book, dummy. And just those
Hold on,
words.
hold on. Let me ask you a question. In prison in Sing Sing, he would tell people, read the book, dummy.
Dummy. Yeah. He'd be arguing with guards, but he had
Okay.
been there. He had been away. He was sent away for something he did, and he had a life sentence at the
Right.
time.
Right.
But he made parole coming out and coming back in.
Right.
But when he came back this time, he had studied the, the, the history of Israel, period. Okay. Then he made us, as I joined with him, actually I joined to him, trying to get away from a situation I had going
Right.
on, trying to get away from another brother.
Right.
And I seen them sitting down there with a bunch of Bibles on the
Right.
grass in Sing Sing studying.
Right.
So to try to get away from the brother I was walking with, I said, look, I'll be right back. And I went over there to sit down. So the next day, after I sat down, I listened for a little bit, and he had another brother by the name of Rabbi who he was teaching. And when I came up with Rabbi and another brother from the Muslims, they used to get to arguing. So I told him to get out of my face with that foolishness. At the same time, of course, Rabbi, whose name was Eliyahu, went and told Daniel. So one day I'm coming off the hill in Sing Sing, and I'm walking with some of the thugs, the real, what you would call gangsters of the day. And Daniel was a short, right? He said, hey, dummy. So my dudes look at me, and they start saying, man, who are you talking to? Okay, you in the middle. I said, so they telling me, well, go and knock that guy out, So I rolled over to him. He said, don't you raise your hand. You was a dummy. I said, why you call me a dummy? He said, because you are a dummy. Who are you? That was his question. Who are you? Can you explain to me who you are? So I scratched my head, of course. But he mellowed it down so the friction wasn't coming up any longer.
Right.
Because they were listening to.
Right.
You a dummy. So I said, well, what do you mean by that, sir? He said, if you want to know, I hold classes on the grass every day. So on this particular day, I'm trying to get away from him, get away from one of the guys I grew up with. And to get away from him, I knew he wasn't going over there. But I walked over there and I sat down again. And he began, as I walked up, he had his back to me. He said, dummy, sit down. That word alone ticked me. Why you keep calling me a dummy? You are a dummy. So then I sat down. He sat down, we went to the book. First, he started showing me the characters, how they were black, opposed to what was being portrayed around the world.
Right.
So I'm saying, where you get this information from? And he took me to the scriptures he showed me. We went from there, we began studying history. I learned a great deal in those months that I was there with him. I became a teacher, a Moreh.
Right.
And the first name I took on was Moshe, after Moses.
Moshe. Okay.
And it reminded me of that because my sister and my brother also, right, it was like Moses, Aaron, and Miriam.
Right.
Okay, so I just took on the name Moshe. And then I went from there. He and I got separated. I went to Danamore. There I began teaching brothers and raising brothers in the knowledge themselves. I left there and went to Greenhaven, where I met Daniel again. So we began teaching many brothers. I mean, you know, a lot of brothers died in Attica, in the Attica Rebellion.
What year was that?
That was in 71.
Okay.
But at you know, when they died, but when I died, when we were together, this is in 66 and 67.
67, okay.
Okay. So we studied the Hebrew language. We began learning about history. We started studying world history, connecting up the tribes and connections, you know, connecting up Esau and who's Esau, and you know the whole gamut of that.
Right.
And we studied real hard because he was a hard teacher, believe me. You know, he forced us. He didn't want you to represent him or anything that he talked about being a dummy. So he made sure that you understood what you was trying to explain to the people you was trying to attract to the culture. So, but anyway, I came out of Greenhaven in 1966, between 1966 and 67. And from there, because he was still awake, and I hadn't connected up with Caleb and them, and Abner, I went to Ben Isaacin.
Okay.
On Tompkins Avenue. And when I arrived there, there was some beautiful brothers that were there at that time.
And that's where Chief Counsel sent you to. He sent you to Ben Isaacin.
Yeah,
okay.
He used to talk about Prince Yaakov all the time while we were away. And so that's where I came.
Right.
And when I got there, there was quite a few brothers there that some are still around today.
Who do you remember when you first got there? Like, do you remember some of the brothers?
Yeah, I remember Nasir Barak.
Okay.
I remember Nashan.
Okay.
I remember Amram. Dada, Ben Israel, Raphael, Bamberg. Prince Rishadai came along about that time.
Right.
Ephraim, Yoel, Ben Israel, Ben Saul, Enoch, Naphtali, chief of chiefs. He came along about that time. Caleb used to come back, but they had left with Abner.
Well, I thought Chief of Chiefs Naphtali came in through Israel Atik.
I'm saying we both used to were part of Israel Atik.
Oh, you both were part of Israel Atik, okay.
Okay. Now, we set up Israel Atik because I got an apartment in Daniel's building on Albany Avenue.
Okay.
And all of them used to come to me, and we used to have a class set up where he was trying to bring brothers back together. He was bringing Nasir Barak. We had REA from 125th Street.
Right.
A lot of brothers were coming through because we were really trying to revamp. But we were revamping with the street knowledge to go to the street and convert brothers and gather in brothers.
Well, you said REA from 125th. You mean from Pop Bivens' place?
Pop's business place, yeah.
Oh, so there was a communication between the brothers from Uptown from the Tanakh school and the brothers from Benazaki.
Though in those days, first of all, when you seen an Israelite first, you didn't see many at the time. Okay, so to find a group of brothers who had some knowledge of that, we clung. There was no wars going or confusion and friction going on between us at that time, other than when Abner and them broke with Ben Azakim, right, which was before I came home, but they were still communicating.
Right.
Then it was Raphael and Bamberg and all these brothers, Nasi Barak, Rubai,
Right.
Ephraim came along about that time. Let me see, Chief Chaim and Sister Miriam, and that was while I was on Tompkins Avenue. I left there and went to Beth Shalom first, and
where was Beth Shalom located at that time? Because it's not the same Beth Shalom that's on Willoughby Avenue, right?
No, it's just where Shema is now.
Okay. Shema Yisrael, okay.
Right. We all went over to Beth Shalom, and we started training, teaching, learning. At that time, we had Priest Emmanuel, Caleb, and all of them came over there. And in the midst of that, we were still trying to reopen up Israelitique, but we were doing it at Daniel's house.
Right.
Okay. So we would come on Sunday and we would sit down and we'd study and communicate together, trying to bring that information to our people, because we knew, and at that time the 5%ers were coming up, the Muslims were coming up. So we had to try to come up with showing our strength and our brotherhood. Then we had a class with the Masons. All right. So now, in order to be able to communicate and present who we were, those brothers that hung out together mainly at that time, and that's long before Simeon and them came from Chicago.
Right.
But at that time, Prince Reuben hadn't gone to Chicago. Okay. Then we had Jan Gadot, Eli, Ben Sar, Kanuk, another Naphtali, Nashan. You know, all these brothers that come around, were coming around. So we left there. Like I said, we went to Beth Shalom. Ben I closed down, and ended up we were at Beth Shalom for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
When Simeon and them first came from Chicago,
right,
is after Prince Reuben had gone to Chicago.
Right.
And then we came back, and I remember the day distinctly because Joshua was getting ready to he was running for some position. And we were holding.
That's Chief of Chiefs Joshua, right?
Chief Joshua, yeah.
Right.
We were holding an affair for him on Pacific Street. And I was playing the drums at the time, I remember. When Yaakov and them came to the affair with a bunch of Israelites. It looked like an army, all right? And they came, so to the people in the community, they had seen us, they had heard us, but now they started paying attention because of they saw the unity. And they saw the brothers were dressed in turbans, they had their staffs, and you know. And so they rolled on Pacific Street that particular day. And I think who came at that time was Simeon, I believe it was Simeon. I know
Chief Shalomo.
Chief Shalomo, Yehuda.
Right.
A lot of the brothers from Chicago that had come. They didn't stay long. Some of them went back to Chicago, but Chief Simeon and them stayed. I think he stayed, but they anyway. The next time I
Yeah,
met him,
Chief Simeon stayed in New York.
stayed.
Yeah.
And Bushaman Yehuda, all these brothers had come out, and the brothers at those times we were like together, you know. And as I look at it, something wanted to divide us. I don't know what it's called, a force, but we were making a difference. We had respect to all the gangs. We had, we went out and gathered them, brought them to tables, sat them down and talked to them. And we were heading in a direction. But at that time, I said, I guess what went on in Ben Isaac, and Yaakov told me to go to Beth Shalom. Because I think it was like sort of like fall, sort of like getting distorted in a sense. Okay. And so I went on over to Beth Shalom under Raphael.
Nabi Raphael.
Nabi Raphael. Prince, the Bamberg would come by. Yubal.
Right.
Let me see who else. Nashan. Zebekiah. Captain Ephraim. Yoel. And all of us used to go to Beth Shalom. Now that is where Shemar is.
Right.
Same building.
Right.
And for a while, when Shemar and them when Prince Japur got Shemar, I was with them then.
Okay.
Right. But then I went on because my forte in Israel is I don't communicate with many brothers. I mean, different camps, all the way from here to from there to Atlanta, to various camps, Philadelphia, Cohen Netanya, and them in Mount Vernon. I've had the opportunity to be able to commune with them. I didn't get into the issue, well, these are messianic, the issue that we speak about sometimes where Raphael, they were trying to say Raphael was a Christian.
Right.
At the time.
Right.
I didn't let that bother me.
Right.
You were my brother.
Right.
You're still my brother, for those of them that are still alive.
Right.
Okay. So my interest was, I guess it was on another level. And then what I was doing too, I had formulated a program called Project 7 in 1970.
What was Project 7 about?
Project 7 was a rehabilitation program.
Okay.
That was to, change people, because that's when drugs really started coming into the communities.
And all our people, at that time, it was the heroin?
The heroin. It was heroin.
Yeah.
And everybody had been in, I had been in that and all that, so I come out of it. So I decided to want to make sure that I got my people out of it. And I would go from Manhattan and from Brooklyn. In 1970, I had gone to a place called the First Temple of House of David, where the leader was Solomon ben David, who's still around today.
Oh, wow.
On Dumont Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And Brother James Elder Reed, who was an administrator for Interfaith Hospital at that time. And I slipped too. Right. I ain't gonna say I just went straight. I fell back.
Right.
And I ended up having to go to Interfaith. And there we started from Interfaith Project 7. So in 1970, it was 7 of us, marched out of this First Temple of the House of David and took a building on Skank Avenue. We went in the buildings, abandoned building. We had water coming up out of the spout. I ran the plumbing. Right? throughout the building. And we took the building and we started converting and taking people out of Israel, out of the street, bringing them to the program, and then teaching them about being kosher, things you should eat, and things of that nature. God bless the dead. Brother James was a heck of an orator. He just happened to be, he was real large. So he used to like want to go in front of people so much. But if I stop to think about it, one of the wisest guys I've ever met was Brother James. But anyway, we marched out of 730 Dumont Avenue.
Right.
And we marched into the building on Skank Avenue.
Right.
And at that time, Corn Levy and them had a spot on Belmont. Okay? So when they used to give their affairs, we used to come there. And then I sort of like gathered up most of the youngsters that was in that area, East New York at the time. And we're bringing them to Project 7. We had a youth program. I became a youth coordinator.
Right.
So I was connected with people like Akbar and all of them during that time. The 5%ers.
Right.
And so when I brought them, I started bringing them to the congregation, to the house on Skank Avenue, we were teaching them about Hebrew culture. And I think about that time also, I remember Benai had, before that, they had Tompkins Avenue closed up. It was at Beth Shalom. They left Beth Shalom, and I think, if I remember correctly, they went to Amboy Street.
Right.
Okay. At Obadiah's house.
Right.
And from there, I think they went to one other place they went to, but then they got the place on Buffalo.
Right.
All right. And Kime at that time was left in charge.
Right. That's what Prince Rishad said. 1969, Nasi Yaakov went back. 68 or 69, he went back to Chicago. Right, and he left.
He left Kime in charge.
Right.
And so we used to go to. They had a restaurant. I think it was on Ralph Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
On Ralph Avenue, correct.
He had a restaurant on Ralph Avenue. We went, so a lot of brothers used to come from all over to the restaurant.
Right.
So we meet brothers in the street. My flow was, I connected with a lot of brothers that was already in the street. Like I knew Tavel, I knew.
Who's that? Nasi Tavel from
Nasi
Hashaba?
Tavel.
Right.
Hashaba. Yehozadek. Carmel's son. Let me see who else. Yahshua. As I said, at that point we was when Simeon and them came, we were doing a fair for James Tucker, which was his name, to run for a position. So we were getting politically involved. Some of us became involved with the union, working with District 65 Labor Union, that Raphael was, at that time, I think he was the president, or the vice president or something. But he was pretty up there with the union. Along with that, naming some of the brothers, because you forget all these brothers. I mean, there's so many of them at the time. Baruch. Baruch was a sax player.
Okay.
And he used to, I think he was connected with
Hashaba, right?
No, he was with Ben Azaki.
He was with Ben Azaki, okay.
There was one at Hashaba. Right. But see, a lot of times, brothers took on names, and you might hear a brother over here with the same name.
Right.
you know,
Right.
and sometimes you be talking about one brother and really be meaning another brother.
Right.
Because everybody was grabbing on names.
Right.
And my name's changed from uh
Moshe.
from Moshe to at first was Zebekiah.
Right.
And then it developed into Zebekiah, which means the sacrifice of Yah.
Right.
And I got involved in many other things because a lot of the things that they were doing within Israel, I was busy doing in the community,
Right.
you know, politically
Right.
and reconnecting, trying to build up stuff like, when they used to have a boys' high and that affair they have uh, every Monday they used to have. I was involved with that. I was
Right.
involved with Sister Injuri, who was Prince Yehuda, Bushamine, not Bushamine Yehuda, but he used to be the correction officer.
Okay.
Okay, he and I had a store on St. John for a minute.
Right.
Or before we got the store, he was, you know, his son was dating Sister Injuri,
Okay.
and Sister Injuri had tended to go towards the African movement.
Right.
So she organized the meetings they used to have in Boys High.
Okay.
Then we went from there into the construction thing,
Okay.
right? I helped set up Fight Back in Paul Robeson's high school, where we were stopping making construction places, shut them down. All right,
Right.
you gonna put some blacks on this spot.
Right.
You know, at that time I was rolling with Big Daddy Kane,
Okay.
uh, Haru, Mackey, and
Right.
all of them out of Albany projects.
Right.
You know, so in general, in terms of the commitment to Israel and the commitment to myself and my people, I've
Right.
always been out there trying to motivate and keep things. When they have their issues, I just look. I'm not with that.
Right.
I'm your brother. So I used to meet people like Jehoshaphat and all this. We used to meet in the street.
Right.
Then I opened up a thing called what was the name of that? Midnight Merchants. I took all the young brothers from that I had associated with in East New York who were 1 foot in Israel and 1 foot out. You know, and I started talking to them about organization and merchandising and selling things. So we called it the Midnight Merchants because after we began selling stuff until after the sun went down.
Okay.
You know, and so we were trying to bring brothers, and these are mostly brothers out of East New York.
Right.
So I connected with that, and then I went all the way back to the Bronx. I was hooking brothers up from the Bronx, from Manhattan, trying to put them in a sense of direction to empowerment, knowing that you had to work together. But sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, you know,
And why is that?
because I guess you could say it's our mentality.
Right.
You know, we, sometimes we want to be chiefs and we're really not.
Right.
Sometimes we want to be, we present the wrong things before people. We conduct our lives in different ways that don't reflect what we're talking about.
Right.
You know, but the idea was to bring everybody back to the fact of, hey, we're the children of Israel.
Absolutely.
You know, So with that, that's just the story in New York. New York, I played a role, well, I would say a low-key role in the front, but a lot in the terms of the communities and stuff that was going on.
Right.
Because I didn't let the issues between Israel fighting with, having confusion with each other, play a role in terms of our people who 2/3 didn't know that they were Israelites and needed to know. And division turns people off. Because most people today are really looking, that's why the gangs that have formulated in New York, because of that. The unity part of it. Having somebody to belong to, something to belong to.
Right.
And that goes back to the early 50s,
Right.
you know. And as I look at it, it was all the development that we had to develop. When I had Project 7, we were also involved with NGRO, National Growth and Reconstruction Organization, under Thomas B. Matthews, the third best neurosurgeon in the country.
Right.
You know, I did a lot of stuff with Beverly Prince, Harlem Span. So my involvement went from there. I was with Marcus Garvey's, not him per se, but Marcus Garvey Daycare Center, which was in the Bronx. Then I came back to Brooklyn, began working for the Department of Park and Recreation.
Okay.
I worked there for 8 years. I left that, coming to the time for me headed when I came to Atlanta, which was 97. I came down in Atlanta and it wasn't too many Israelites. Before I came down here, I drove every Yahoo and Sister Shakora. I think that's one of Zipporah's Isha's mother.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah. Ima Shakora.
Ima Shakur.
Yeah.
I drove her down here, down to North Carolina, I think it was.
Right.
And then I went back to New York. But then after I went to Jersey for a good while. Then I came down here in 97. And when I got down here, most of the Israelites down here were Messianic at the time. There was the Tabernacle of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
There was a New Covenant of Israel. And there was Israel of God. I participated in all three of those groups. I joined a place called the Tabernacle of Israel, which was at that time, it was in Clarkston.
Right.
And then we moved to Church Avenue.
Right.
In Decatur. And I began teaching there. We started trying to put our acts together and get together and develop movements towards bringing all the brothers together. We had what we called the Love Feast. A lot of brothers from both sides came. Can you hear me?
I hear you. I hear you
Okay.
loud and clear. I'm just listening.
We formulated what we call the Love Feast. And that was at my brother Yahweh's house. And Israelites came from all over. While down here, for a good while, then Elazar and them came before he died.
Right.
That were Israelites, that that weren't
I
connected
think
messianically.
yeah, I think Moray Elazar and them got there like in 89, 90, something like that, right?
Right. Well,
Okay.
he was down, but it was a little later than that, I think. They were down here before I got here,
Okay.
right? Before I came down here to stay. I had come down here, but I didn't stay down here.
Well, okay. I get what you're saying.
Okay. Then I got with the Tabernacle of Israel
Right.
on that journey.
Right.
And I went from the Tabernacle of Israel to the New Covenant of Israel.
Right.
And then I came back to Israel of God.
Right.
Still connecting brothers up because I didn't allow the division that was developing
Right.
between the Israelites that were nationalistic and those that are messianic.
Right.
I knew the story, I knew the history, but I didn't let that affect how I treat you as a brother.
And then you coming from a time where Ben King used to get along with the brothers from Uptown, right?
Yeah,
Pop
yeah.
Bivens.
Our business,
Yeah. Have you ever met Pop Bivens?
yeah, yes. I went up there with Barack.
Okay.
I
Nasi
went
Barak. Okay.
Nasi Barack, and I remember leaving there with a brother named Yohanadab, right? And we used to teach on 125th Street.
Right.
I'm going downtown with the elders and them down on 42nd Street
Right.
teaching, though I didn't belong to the camp. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So basically, I was lending myself the understanding and the knowledge that I had to trying to be an implement of joining people together because that's what we needed.
Right.
You know, we needed to be connected, diverse, but connected,
Right.
agreeing to disagree,
Right.
you know. And so I worked at that a long time. I did things down here, connected people up with banks, showing them, when Citizens Bank first got started, you know. So there's so much things that so many things that I've been involved in with trying to develop us as a people.
Right.
And get us on focus because it's about learning and teaching the word of God to the people of the world.
Right.
And I come to understand that, we came out of Egypt to be a force that was to enlighten the world and awaken the 70 nations who had gone astray,
Right.
who didn't know Yah, didn't understand their relationship with him.
Absolutely.
So to make them realize, hey man, like even with today, with this corona thing, this is a disease, or this virus has touched the entire planet.
Absolutely.
And people are trying to develop cures, but they're heading in the wrong direction. Why they're heading in the wrong direction? But don't you think that we should be asking the Creator who gave us life,
Absolutely.
right?
That's
What's
right.
wrong? How can we change this? How can we make the difference?
Right.
But I'm thinking of it as this: you wonder. Well, Isaiah talks about Israel coming back, being brought forth out of the land. Moses established it, that God was going to gather his people from all around the world. I'm looking at it as the means by which that is going to be done. Nations, you want to clear this out of my land, your land? Give up Israel. Make those Israelites that don't know they're Israelites, Israelites. Let them know their history. Bring out the truth about the matter. You understand?
Okay, I understand.
So this is how I see it. I see that the disease is touching everybody, and everybody doesn't have a clue. Everybody's jumping on our president, who really don't have a clue. Okay, and the doctors don't have a clue. So the only one to ask about the clue, I would say, and think, would be to call on Yah.
That's right. That's right.
Begin to make the difference. So in this first meeting we having today, I think that's imperative. The other
Right.
thing I would say in imperative, don't talk about a brother unless you walk a mile in the shoes of his journey.
Right.
Okay, you can't condemn a brother because you don't know what a brother did, why he did what he did,
Right.
and anything else we would be bearing false witness against our neighbors because we wasn't there.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
and that's so vital. But I hear brothers, I listen to them, they, you know, and all it's doing, because we don't reach the world. See, the world's looking for the unity, and we're presenting it, but we're letting issues and stuff like that present a lack of unity. But yet we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." That oneness is supposed to be the oneness amongst us as a nation.
Right.
And now, because we in our foreign land, all we can do here, we could never really fulfill the whole law here.
Right.
So what we're doing here is rehearsing the righteous acts. That when we return home, if Yah allows us, that we would know what to do because it was handed to us to be kept in the land.
Mm. That's right.
So that's a mouthful, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
We have another time, we can get into, more
Yeah,
more
we could.
names,
Yeah, we could get into more names and more things
more
because I do
people.
really. I do. This is gonna be part one, and then I could get back to you and on a later date and just get some more information, some more specific information. But that was a lot that was given. I mean, you weren't playing when you said you wrote everything down.
Yeah, I got a whole book here, man. Listen, I started writing last night. You know,
Right,
I got to writing, I got to thinking about this and thinking about that, and thinking about,
right.
man, I woke up with a book, trying to remember the names of brothers and
Right,
titles brothers had.
right. And just to ask you a question, like in the 1960s, how was the atmosphere in New York City in terms of black people? I know that there were a lot of groups that were like the NOI, the Nation of Islam. You had you also had like some African movements that were coming up. You had the Black Panthers. You had all these groups, and then you also had Israel. What? How was the atmosphere between all the groups? How did the groups get along? What kind of cohesion or non-cohesion was there between the groups? Was there anything that you could remember?
Well, I remember uh, the Panthers and the fathers of Elijah Muhammad, all right, as well as Wallace D. Most of the guys that came and joined were people that came out of prison, you know, that were grappling and grasped on to certain things. They took the lead from Malcolm, you know,
Right.
when they started developing it, because I was involved with with them on all levels, right? Deruba, we grew up together, just about, So, but he grew up. He was a little younger than me.
Right.
We in our institutions. He started. He was one of the first FAMTAs, I think, with 12, and then he formulated the Black Liberation Army.
Mm.
So there's a lot of you know, behind the scenes
Right.
of their teaching and communicating with each other. I used to walk the streets of New York, Jersey, anywhere I went, because I had no fear. Because I knew brothers would come if I called, like I was telling you the other day when I was letting you know the night of the blackout.
Right.
I was in. I had taken over the building. I took over Cone. Cone was the building that Ayala Van Sant's husband was running,
Right.
right? And I took over the building. The 5%ers and stuff were in the community. So I started getting friction out of them, right? So I called Prince. And I see, though I hadn't been in Ben Azaki at the time, but they rode, right? And if
Right.
he called me, like we went to Connecticut one time, I wasn't with them, but I went, you know. So when I called him, he came. But I think about 10 or 15 cars in line. They all got out, they stepped out, they had their staffs and stuff in their hand. So it sent a message to the 5%ers. And what deepened it was as they left, the blackout went in Brooklyn.
Mm.
So, and then they already had Cohen Levy's group on Van Sicklen. So that empowered us as Israelites,
Right.
But a lot of us let it get away from us when we got into those conflicts.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So I was there with that, and as I look at it today, we're beautiful people when we understand each other.
Okay.
And we got so many of our people that's still out in the world that think they're one thing and don't know the history of it all.
Right.
Which will bring me back to my teacher. He said dummy, and he was right. I was dumb as hell.
Right.
From what I learned about afterwards. At least I thought I was smart, you know. But when I began to learn and began to study, just to take this to knock alone, all right, learning the things that were going on for a while about what the Bible meant to us as black people and
Mm-hmm.
also white people. Because all the stories in the book.
Mm.
I kid with people, but you know what? I look at Trump as being Esau's great, 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 great grandson. Okay? And if you look at it, in reality, you look at Rome, Greece, America, its founding fathers, all have that connection to living by the sword. We developed it from them. Our children, we look in the streets, they shooting each other. They ain't get that from each other. They got that from them. They were born to live by the sword. And in truth, ain't nothing we could do against them when it comes to war in that
Right.
fashion, other than have Yah on our side.
Right.
the artillery, the stuff that they've developed, we can never touch
Right.
unless we have Yah on our side. And our leaders need to understand that. I was watching the civil rights thing, of which I've been involved, right, for a long time. Rainbow Push, People's Agenda, National Action Network,
Right.
you know, because I realized that we to empower each other, we got to be part of each other.
Mm.
Our issues are basically the same, you know, lack of job function, all the stuff that we're suffering from affects us all,
Right.
you know, and the Torah gives us an insight, a better insight to how to overcome it
Right.
by just doing the Creator's will,
Absolutely.
you know. So we covered a lot of territory today, my brother, you
Yeah,
know.
definitely. I appreciate it. We definitely could come back and continue, but I think this is about an hour and some change of information. So this is good. I could start chopping this up and start putting it up.
Okay, sounds good.